you don't hear any of them celebrating a ceasefire. You don't hear really any of them
They said they
forward.
just wanted a ceasefire. That's what they said this whole time. Pastor
They did.
Stephen, where did they go?
Well, they got one. But I will say this. There have been some prominent leftist figures that have very begrudgingly acknowledged that this was a big deal for Trump, to which case I would also just want to highlight in this conversation the fact that is there anyone else living on earth who actually is more deserving of the Nobel Peace Prize than President Trump?
Hey, everybody. Welcome back to the Under God podcast. We're so excited to have you joining us today. My name's Daniel. I'm joined with our host, Pastor Stephen Martin. We're going to be doing our culture review episode today. The last couple of weeks, we've had other stuff that we did instead of our culture review, some crazy important stories and some experiences of you going to Israel and some of that stuff. We're excited to be back in the culture review episode this week. Pastor Stephen, how are you doing today?
Hey, I'm doing really good. And there's a couple of things I was thinking. So when you open the podcast, why does your arm out of control? Your arm's like constantly doing this. Are you okay?
Excited. Yeah.
Are you feeling okay?
Okay.
Okay. I'm just making sure. Now you're blocking my shot, bro.
Yeah.
What are you doing?
Hey.
Anyways, no, that's funny. I love. For those of you who don't know, can't tell, me and Pastor Daniel are good friends. Well, the thing I'm really excited about is number one, I'm just excited to be back in the fray.
He makes me cry.
But these 5 headlines are like really, really good. Like, I think before the show, we're kind of like, hey, we could do this, we could do that. I'm like, no, I'm doing it. I would love it. Hey, do you need any notes? I'm like, no, I just need a cup with some energy drink. By the way, it's not coffee, it's an energy drink, and my Bible. That's pretty much all I need to be able to address these 5 things.
I said, I printed notes for you. He said, I don't need them.
I definitely don't need them for this.
Okay.
Definitely don't need them for this. So let's jump in.
Yeah, or jump in. So the first headline that I wanted to talk about today is this historic peace deal that Trump has brokered between Israel and Gaza, which is just, I just want to start this off by saying this could not have happened under any other president. It's one of the most incredible things that we've ever seen in my lifetime in domestic or foreign policy or anything. It's really a historic moment. So for everyone tuning in, trying to ask what is the deal with that, on October 13th, President Trump announced this stage 1 of this deal was going to be signed. And what this deal essentially does is, one, it returned the hostages who are now the ones that were still living are all back and safe. Yeah, there were 20 living hostages and 28 more deceased hostages. They're still going to be returned in the process of getting returned. That in and of itself should be celebrated by everybody. It doesn't matter right, left, or center, although I've seen a lot of people silent on that, but all of the hostages have been returned. And now what's going to happen is that there's going to be a backing up of the IDF forces, and there's some stage lines where, hey, they're going to back up to this line, and then they're going to back up to this line, then there's going to be a buffer zone, and all of that is going to get worked out. But it all got agreed to, which just seemed like an impossibility even just a couple of months ago, that Hamas would ever actually sign on to any kind of a deal. And so I just think it's incredible. Pastor Stephen, tell me what you think about it.
Yeah, I agree with you. I don't think there would be any other American president that could have done it. And here's why. The truth of the matter is, when Trump sets his mind to do something, he just doesn't stop. And the reality is, especially with the decades we've spent in the Middle East, there's all of this institutional knowledge that kind of says, hey, this is never going to happen. This is how all these people work. You know what Trump does? He just comes in and he just says, you know what? I'm not going to listen to any of that. Okay, maybe some of that's factual, maybe some of that's true, but I'm going to give it everything that I got. I love that he sent was it Steve Witkoff and Jared Kushner, two Jews, by the way, which is pretty incredible, to essentially broker this peace deal between the Arab partners. And it's interesting. They were getting all of this information from the CIA and all of the clandestine services. This will never work. This will never work. And they just stayed doggedly focused. They were given complete, operational ability to go in and to strike a deal. And it is a phase deal. And so I tend to not trust homicidal death cult terrorists. And so I'm not really sure how much of it's going to hold, but here's what I do know. All the leverage that Hamas had over Israel, the 20 living hostages, has been completely removed, which is massive as we look forward to what happens next. And the truth of the matter is, for all of the cries of genocide and all of the free Palestine people, it's interesting. You don't hear any of them celebrating a ceasefire. You don't hear really any of them stepping forward.
They said they just wanted a ceasefire. That's what they said this whole time.
They did.
Where did they go?
Well, they got one. But I will say this. There have been some prominent leftist figures that have very begrudgingly acknowledged that this was a big deal for Trump, to which case I would also just want to highlight in this conversation the fact that is there anyone else living on earth who actually is more deserving of the Nobel Peace Prize than President Trump?
Yeah, but he'll never
the answer's no, but those leftists in Finland, they're never gonna budge budge. They're talking about dignity and respect and not actually saving human lives.
What about the 20 people that are going to live now? Yeah,
it's unbelievable.
It's unbelievable.
And I do want to make this note because I had just finished a trip in Israel.
Yeah.
I'd literally just gotten back. I hadn't been back a couple of days before this peace deal was announced. Which, by the way, I was there with hundreds of evangelical Christians praying with our Jewish brothers and sisters, actually worshiping at the Tower of David, praying for the return of the hostages and for all of the genocidal rhetoric and all of the anti-Israel, anti-Bibi, anti-Jewish, posturing of the world. The truth is, the Jews are the most life-loving people ever. I mean, in Jewish theology, they actually believe that to save one life is to save an entire world. I mean, the truth is they could have gone in and just demolished it. They could have ended this really quick, but they've literally persisted through 2 years simply because they actually value life, not just the life of their hostages, although that was actually front and center, as it should be in a morally real and serious approach. But they also, dropped leaflets before they would bomb, Hamas, commanders and all of that.
Which is completely, the reality is so different from what the media portrayed for so long, which is one reason I think it's so hard for them to embrace this peace deal, is because they've been portraying Israel as
it lies about everything.
Like they lie.
And now
about
you hear
everything.
the stories coming out from the hostages. Now the stories, they're actually talking about how Hamas was actually behind with their collaborators in the mainstream media, actually pushing a narrative. And it was because of that narrative and the complete weakness that President Joe Biden had towards this that actually prolonged this outcome. And, I think this is really important. Trump has an ability to come in and instead of sympathizing with the victimizer, he draws an extremely hard line. And he actually supported the morally justified position in this case. I mean, October 7th, 2 years ago, 1,200 innocent Jewish civilians were massacred by these by these absolute barbarian people, Hamas, and he constantly in every report would say, hey, that's true, and we're going to take care of this, and he drew a very, very hard line with Hamas, but I don't believe he was also super easy on the Israelis either. I mean, he had in his mind, I want to end this conflict, and the truth of the matter is,
whatever it takes to get peace, I'm going to fight
100%, and so this certainly isn't ideal for both sides, but it ended at least this particular phase with these hostages being held.
Well, the most important thing was getting the hostages back, and now that that's done, it takes really all of the leverage that Hamas has away, which one of the things I want to point out about this story is that you've seen right after the ceasefire, you saw Hamas now pulling Gazans out of their own house and then shooting them in the streets. And the Trump administration stepped in and said, this isn't what you'd agreed to. I didn't just mean you couldn't kill the Jewish people. Like, you need to stop killing all people, because Trump does. He wants the peace. He loves the peace. And you hear nothing from the mainstream media. The mainstream media and the legacy media, they aren't mentioning that Hamas is pulling out Gazans. Where's the outcry about them? They only cared so long as it was to slander the Jews. That's really all that they cared about.
And that goes back to the age-old thing. And we taught about the spirit of Amalek in our church. And there's really the spirit of Amalek is a spirit that's in opposition to God's people, the Jews first and the Christians eventually. I mean, we see what's happening in Nigeria. I mean, Christians are being persecuted all over the world. You don't ever hear anything about that either. You don't hear the same thing with Jewish civilians. Or I just think about the nearly 1,000 IDF soldiers that gave their life. You hardly ever heard anything about that. Now, I of course make sure that that's front and center on my social media, and I'm always resharing, honest, faithful people that are sharing those stories. But the mainstream media, the narrative is completely crumbling. And it's interesting. Now they shift from this to no King's protest. I don't think that's in our headline, but they kind of shift to the next thing without actually
addressing the thing that they were wrong about.
I was wrong. This was wrong, and I'm going to get better.
Nothing to see over here. Let's just move on and pretend.
There's your hand again, and this is where I'm just messing. I'm going to mess with you in your hand the entire podcast.
I'm going to go home and cry myself to sleep.
You're
tonight.
not going to do that. You're stronger than that. You're stronger than that. But I think
I'm
that
so
just
soft and sensitive.
No, you're not. You're not at all. Maybe to Maddie, but no one else.
To Maddie.
Like so, I think that ultimately, I think this is where the podcast is thinking biblically about what's going on. It is it is nearly impossible to be able to see what's happened over the last 2 years, the world's response to it, even the responses on college campuses and all the rot that's going on there. I know we have a headline on that. that and not see that we are literally in a spiritual war. And many believers, they get, sucked into the political things about this or that. And I always tell people, I'm not a starry-eyed Zionist. I mean, their government is full of people just like our government's full of people. And I call balls and strikes. There's things that I like. There's things that I don't like. Certainly less things that I don't like in this administration than the last. However, I think you can be honest about, political realities and actions.
I don't have to support every single thing.
But I think it's important to kind of just zoom out and actually see this in the biblical context, which the Apostle Paul says we're fighting a spiritual battle, and that spiritual battle, at least in the Holy Land, has come to a pretty good place at the moment. I'll be looking at what happens with Hamas. There's lots of back and forths about whether or not it's going to hold. My instinct is it probably isn't, but Israel is certainly in the best position they've ever been.
Yeah, well, if it doesn't hold now, Israel can essentially just do what they need to do militarily without risk of their own hostages.
Well, and they don't have the Houthis, the Houthis backed by Yemen.
Or Iran.
They don't have Hezbollah in the north. I mean, they really, God has really positioned his people to be able to actually defend their land. And so I'm very excited about that.
Yeah,
so,
I'm super excited about it. And one thing I'll add before we move on to the next topic is that, Christ tells us in the Sermon on the Mount, blessed are the peacemakers. And Trump quoted that. I thought it was really profound that he quoted
peacemakers, not peacekeepers.
Right. Yeah.
By the way,
peacemakers.
big difference.
And one of the things that you often need to get peace is you need to go through a level of conflict. But one of the things that I talked about when he first said this is the reason that Jesus says that is he says, blessed are the peacemakers, for they will be called sons of God. And so what I want people to understand about that is that when you bring peace, you're actually reflecting God's image back at the world, because God he loves peace, but he sometimes we have to go through these conflicts in order to arrive at that place. And President Trump over the past several years did the hard thing, the past couple of years did the hard things in order to arrive at that peace, right? Peacemakers means that you're the one who you come into the conflict and you do what you have to do. And like you said, you doggedly sought it out until we arrived at that place. And in doing so, you're bearing God's image back, because God loves peace. He doesn't want these people killing themselves in the Gaza Strip. He doesn't want the terrorist rulers of Hamas to be pulling people out of their homes and shooting them in the head. And I just thought that was very profound. It also made me think about, it's obvious that President Trump is considering eternity a little bit more these days. And so I pray for him constantly.
I was hoping, that's interesting you brought that up. I was thinking, do we want to go there or not? This is only one of 5, but I think we should go there. Yeah. There was this kind of candid moment where he was asked about heaven and eternity, and he kind of laughs, kind of tongue in cheek, and he essentially says, well, I don't know if I'm heaven bound. Yeah. But I want people to stop dying. And he just kind of dodges the whole thing. And you have lots of people stepping out and going, but I've done all these things. Oh, see, Trump, he's thinking he can get into heaven by doing all these things. And I didn't interpret it that way at all. Yeah. I think that was a humble thing. I really
think so
do.
Too. He's the leader of the free world.
I think you got a picture of Trump's humility and how he's thinking. I don't think he would be so presumptuous to assume that he's getting into heaven. By the way, the believers, the Bible says, Paul, he said, after I've done all these things, I
don't want to be disqualified.
I fear that I'm myself disqualified. Yeah. He was talking about the eternal prize. He said he works out his salvation in fear and trembling. I actually think you saw a pretty rare moment of humility from President Trump. But I think of all the places he should be humble before, it's God. So I was very encouraged. And you can definitely see God's doing something there.
God's doing something in his life, and like the people who look down on that because of theological reasons, and why aren't the people closest with him sharing the gospel? I'm like, do you realize that it's a process? And like the fact that
the truth is there are people all around him. I know for a fact. There's the Faith Advisory Council. I'm going to be attending an event in December. Can I just tell you, Trump is surrounded by people, unlike any other U.S. president, constantly reminding him that there's a God in heaven and he is not them. He is not God. He is not him. And so I think you do have a lot of that. I think you just have a lot of this surface thing. And to your point, God's always working out a process.
Yeah, he's working it out. And like, this is such a different side of him than we saw going back to like when he first announced in 2015. God's doing something great.
It's good.
It's incredible. The next thing is we want to talk about communists and New York City mayorship, right? So Pastor Stephen.
Zoran Mamdani.
Yeah. So
Zoran Mamdani.
For those of you not following along, there's an election happening in New York for their mayor, and there's 3 candidates right now. So what happened is Zoran Mamdani is this absolute communist. That's all he is.
He's a communist
jihadi. Kind of.
Yeah, he represents the Red Green Alliance in probably the most concentrated way of any of these other politicians. More than AOC,
more than AOC,
more than Rashid.
Yeah, that's right.
More than all of these people. And what I mean by that is he's so leftist, but he's also a Mohammedan. So he's also a Muslim.
Yeah.
And so you kind of see this weird thing, like what does the left and Islam have to do with each other?
Yeah.
I mean, if any of these, pro-Palestine LGBTQIA plus people ever actually went there, they would be pushed off the roof.
Yeah, they'd be thrown off the roof.
They'd be killed. They'd be stoned to death, and so you kind of wonder, and here's what I always say, the enemy of my enemy is my friend.
Yeah.
And I think they both want to destroy Western civilization. You have the left that wants to bring in communist ideas. By the way, they're not new ideas. It goes all the way back to the garden. I oftentimes will call it the spirit of Cain and the aspirations of Babel. Read both of those stories and you'll see globalism, and you'll see leftism. You'll see resentful, the resentfulness that happens when sin overtakes your heart. But essentially they want to destroy Western civilization. So does Islam. Islam wants to actually infiltrate it from the inside. Yeah. And by the way, which has been their mode of doing things for hundreds of years. And so you see this in Zoran Mamdani, in the most powerful city, you could kind of argue, but it really is.
The financial capital of the world, the largest American city, right? It's been sort of our pinnacle city in the United States for 100 and plus years. It's the American city that people who don't live in America think of.
Yeah, of course.
Right?
It's very powerful. It's very influential, and they're literally just 20-something years after 9/11 are going to literally elect somebody to run their city that shares the exact same ideology as the men who ran the planes into the World Trade Center.
Yeah.
And so to the towers. And so it's interesting. When I study the Bible, I oftentimes will look at culture and I'll go, how in the world did we get here? These people are nuts. And then I remember that actually Paul says this, the sins we deal with, the struggles, the patterns are actually common. When you go back to scripture, this is a constant theme in scripture. God would deliver the people of Israel. He would then bless them because they would do what he says. Yeah. And then in their blessing, they would forget. And this is always the emphasis. The utopian says we've got to move on to, a new, never before seen future.
We just have to make ourselves into gods.
Yeah, there's some kind of utopia, but the Bible actually says, no, the world works in a cycle. Yeah. That all you have to do is go back or repent, which is where we get that word, return to what is true. And it's interesting. It seems as though New York, particularly its elites, by the way, they're kids that are actually driving the support from Mamdani, all educated in places like Columbia, places like NYU, places, I'm just saying, all educated in this cesspool of anti-Americanism in our college campuses are now the ones actually driving Mamdani to victory. And unless something just crazy happens, I don't think there's any way Cuomo can win. The Republican can't win just because
he's 10%. The Republican Party is 10%.
They just won't do it because they are next to their name, which by the way tells you how the parties are different. Yeah. They are different. They're committed. And so unless something drastic changes, it looks like he's going to be the mayor of New York.
Yeah. I mean, so politically, just Curtis Sliwa, the Republican candidate, there's a lot of people calling for him to drop out so that Cuomo can win.
It won't help.
And I'm like, I don't know how he even has a path, even if, and the truth is Cuomo ruined New York largely. This is sort of the fruit of their own
both
ideology.
the guys are really bad.
Yeah, both the
guys are really bad. One's way worse than the other. Yeah. That's really the option New Yorkers have. I mean, Cuomo literally, against advice of the nurses in the nursing homes, literally shipped COVID positive patients in the nursing homes and literally is responsible for the deaths of thousands. Yeah. And that's not even dealing with his Me Too accusations and his womanizing and all of that. And so now he's kind of come back on the scene. He has name recognition, but he kind of thinks old school. And the truth of the matter is, Mamdani really did a lot of what Turning Point USA did in the last election. He's ground game. He's getting all of these people motivated in these college campuses, these young people, and they're knocking door to door to door. And the truth of the matter is, you kind of have this old legacy candidate that nobody likes, and you have this young guy that is completely insane,
but he's articulate,
but he looks
smiley,
good.
He's well spoken.
Yeah. And that just goes to the how shallow in history, how shallow in just political decisions our cultures become. And the ideas this guy has, public grocery stores, that are funded by the state. It's all communism. And here's the thing about communism. Communism isn't something you can have a little bit of.
Yeah, you have to have the whole thing.
You go all in. And it's never, ever worked. And it's actually
in the financial capital of the country.
In the financial cap. By the way, we see this happening in London. Yeah. London's mayor, I can't off the top of my head remember his name, but he's also a Muslim mayor. Yeah. And you see he's just, literally, you go there and it's like Mogadishu. I mean, it's just like London. He's completely ruined that city. They're about 10 years ahead of where Mamdani is. Yeah. And here's the thing. A lot of people are like, well, this is just a phase. People will get in. But when you study leftism, when you study communism, I mean, the Bolsheviks were essentially less than 9% of the population. Yeah. It was a very small minority. And once they got power, they didn't let go. And this is the thing that you want to be watching for with guys like this. We think, oh, well, there's going to be another election. There's going to be another, I'm going to tell you, that's not always promised, especially in these city campaigns. It's like you let somebody like this take power, it is very difficult to take it away.
Well, I was actually going to ask you about that because there's this stream of thought that I've seen on the right of people that are saying, oh, well, you should just leave them to their own devices so that they'll learn. And it's like, no, actually, once they have the power, they're going to change the dynamics of how the power is obtained in that sphere. And you're not going to be able to go in. The New Yorkers aren't going to be able to change their minds, right? The things that they could do at the precinct and district levels all throughout New York City, and registering votes, and how people can vote in elections, all of those things are on the table. And in communist regimes, those are the first things that start changing, so that they can't actually get voted out later.
Here's what you see, and you see this in every communist takeover, from Pol Pot to Mao to Stalin. You see, not Stalin, it would have been Lenin. You see this. What happens is these communists essentially come in and they make a pact with the elites, with the rich. They essentially say, hey, we'll leave you alone, but you got to have my back. Eventually, they turn and eat the rich. That's actually what always happens. And so here's what I would say to people who are kind of like, just let it go, let them learn. I'll be honest, I've had that sentiment, and I'm kind of convicted. The Bible says I should love God, and as a result, I love God, and I'm going to love my neighbor. It's definitely a neighbor, a very far neighbor, way up north, but I've been there.
But they're Americans?
No, New York's beautiful. I have
all the people they import might not be
I have incredible friends there. My biggest concern is going to be the Jewish community. The largest Jewish community, second to Israel, is actually in New York City. I think there's maybe nearly 600,000. That may be the whole country, but I think there's nearly 600,000 in that region, in that area. I could be a little off on that, but I would just say I care about my friends. I care about their persecution, and they're already being persecuted. I can't imagine what happens next. And so, there's this thing where we have federalism, and we're very blessed that way. A state can go crazy, and because we have 50 states, power is not enumerated in the Constitution for the federal government, left to the states. And so we can actually move. I can move to another state. We have a massive influx coming from California, into our state. I don't know that I love it, but I say, we'll move here. You want to change some of the ways you think? I'm cool.
You want to repent when you're here?
Yeah, you want to repent,
fine.
turn from your ways. I'm great. But we have federalism, which will really help. But nothing's going to. There's going to be a lot of people hurt. There's going to be a lot of things we're going to have to rebuild. And so we got to keep our eyes on that.
Yeah, I agree. The next headline I want to get to, Pastor, is this Chicago elementary school teacher that was mocking Charlie Kirk. She wasn't the only one, but I want to draw particular attention to her at this No Kings protest this past week. And so for those of you who want to know the story is that there was a No Kings protest, which is just an anti-Trump protest, which makes no sense. Trump put out the really funny meme the first time they did this, where he said, I'm so glad to hear that there's not a king, right? I was worried that someone was going to come and take my job, but I'm still your president, which was just amazing. But there's a teacher whose name is Lucy Martinez, who was caught on video mocking Charlie's assassination by, pointing a gun to her neck while other people around her are cheering, which went viral on social media, which led to the school, which is Nathan Hale Elementary School. She's an elementary school teacher in the public school system. And they got so overwhelmed with people trafficking their sites and trying to find everything that they could, that they took down their websites, their social medias, all of this stuff. The school is in a more Hispanic area of Chicago, and so a lot of the people that are on staff at the school seem to be completely okay with what's happening here, right? Like anti Turning Point, anti-Charlie, and pro-assassination. This is, to me, I look at this and I just think, this is disgusting, right? Charlie was assassinated not even 2 months ago, and it's being openly celebrated in these leftist rallies. I mean, what's your take on this?
Yeah, so let's back up just a little bit. After Charlie was martyred for his faith, which he was, he never wasted an opportunity to share the gospel.
That's 100% right.
There's lots of pastors, there's lots of people that, they're seeing all of this clickbait, and they're seeing all of these comments taken out of context. Matter of fact, I was just with a pastor who had a little bit of confusion on what was going on, and I just sat down and we just watched some of the podcasts. We watched the Whatever podcast, where he was so gracious to these girls stuck in this lifestyle and really cared about him. I watched the Oxford debate where everything was kind of pitted against him and saw how he did there. And it's interesting. I looked at my friend and he was just like, he was blown away by his ability to reason, but he came away with the same understanding that I had from the beginning. The truth of the matter is Charlie was the greatest evangelist on college campuses that our nation has ever seen. Yeah. And he went into these pits, these places where churches, many Christians wouldn't go. To every pastor who didn't mention him, who didn't acknowledge, his contribution and why their churches are filling this week. I mean, we've been up nearly 1,500 people. That's sustained over the last several weeks. And it's all because all the people that had listened to Charlie, they had followed Charlie, they thought he was talking about politics, but he was really talking about Jesus. Because we can't talk about freedom without ending at the one to whom freedom is vested.
You trace it all the way back to its source.
He who the sun sets free is free indeed. And he was one of the greatest missionaries. And we're seeing this because all of these people that are saying all of these vile things, that are making all these vile comments, they are primarily coming from K through 12 schools and from our university system. Now, in case you were wondering why that needs to be leveled to the ground, metaphorically, it needs to be cleaned out and gutted, rethought. If you've ever wondered why maybe you should homeschool your kid or find a Christian school, I don't mean just a school that says it's Christian with a cross. I mean a Christian school that's going to teach the good, the beautiful, the true. We have a classical school. It's excellent. If you're ever wondering why you should do that or if you should do that, well, this is just another piece of evidence. These people are literally indoctrinating our kids. I mean, and you just think about the No Kings protest, and I couldn't help but see the demographic. And I'm going to speak to the boomers for a few minutes, and I'm probably going to like it. My parents are boomers, and I love them deeply. But it's like they're primarily filled with older boomers running these things.
Aren't you a boomer?
I'm going to tell you what they are. They're people who think that this is the 60s, and we're still dealing with the same issues of the 60s. And there are lots of issues with the 60s. We're probably going to do it was really, I believe, a refounding of America that we're dealing with now. We need to do a podcast.
In the legal system too.
Yeah, we need to do a podcast series on what happened in the 60s and how we really need to undo a lot of that. However, they literally are just, flower children that still want to fight, still want to protest, and they're on the wrong side here. They're not on God's side. And when you look at this from a biblical standpoint, it's very, very easy to see. You don't have to have all the philosophical arguments nailed down. When the Bible says that we can know someone by the spirit in which they carry. And what spirit is from God and what spirit isn't, especially if you're a believer. And so when you see things like that, I think it's just more evidence that we've got big problems that are just now coming to the surface we have to deal with in education.
Yeah, I think that when you look at the fact that so many of these people that hold this worldview gravitate towards the education system, and it's because one, they don't have any other purpose other than, I feel like I can find some purpose in other people's kids, and that's toxic in its own right. But the system has become designed specifically for people of this worldview to slip right into their system, and it makes it much more hostile for people who share the biblical worldview.
Here's what I would say: they're not slipping into the education.
Yeah, that's right.
System.
You're right. That's right.
Every single school of education, that's where we need to start. I was in a school of education. I actually went all the way through. And I'm going to tell you, 99% of the garbage, the social emotional learning, it was absolutely worthless. Now, I was doing a humanities degree, and so I was more interested in history. And thank God I had a classically trained professor. He was still kind of left, but he was classically trained, and so I got a lot of great things out of my undergrad. But I'm going to tell you, these teacher certification schools, these schools of education, they are actually piping these people directly into our K through 12 system. And here's what I'll say. And this is what blew my mind during 2020. I thought Texas schools were good because we're in Texas. Nope. These schools of education are pumping these graduates into every single community, from little tiny podunk West Texas all the way to the big cities. It is a massive problem that we've got to address.
Yeah, absolutely. Which that leads us right to our next headline, which is talking about the left trying to get after our kids, which was this past week. Jimmy Kimmel used kids as a prop in a really vile drag queen skit thing where they were mocking Eric Trump's new book. And so on his late night show, which Jimmy Kimmel, who just got brought back, he's absolutely not sorry at all. He brought in a drag queen named Trixie Mattel, whose real name is Brian, right? So it's just a complete sexual perversion, to read from Eric Trump's new memoir. And the skit involved Trixie, this drag queen, joking about democracy, potty training Eric Trump, and ultimately shredding the book in a wood chipper as the kids cheer. The kids are fed lines, obviously. And so Jimmy Kimmel comes in, and one of the Trixie comes into this room with all of these kids, and he says, "Oh, do I scare you?" Right? And the kids are fed the line, "No, you're so beautiful. You don't scare us at all." I mean, what's just your reaction to this story?
So my initial reaction is, first of all, I just finished Eric Trump's book. It's called Under Siege, to which case I would say to every podcast listener, it is actually one of those rare books that it is worth not just listening to on Audible, but actually go and buy it. It's an incredible book, and it's a picture into essentially what Trump's been through in the last really 8 to 10 years now. There's another great book that I would say buy them together, Breaking the Law with Alex Marlowe, an incredible book. But these are legitimate. By the way, I read that book of all the Trumps to give a hard time to. Yep. Eric's like the most buttoned up, like measured speaker. He's not like Don or the Don, you know. I mean, they're great, but they're a little boisterous. I mean, he's like running the Trump organization. I mean, he's very level-headed. The book is incredibly well written. I mean, absolute receipts. It's an incredible book. Back to Jimmy Kimmel. All of us knew that when Jimmy Kimmel essentially said that the assassin that martyred Charlie Kirk was a right-wing MAGA. And he held to that even though they already knew that he was trans-Tifa,
that Tyler Robinson,
already knew all of that. He absolutely lied. And then he got smacked. And what do you do? What does he do? He comes right back doing the same thing. Here's what I'll tell you to do. Here's what I'll say. You know, when we approach people like Jimmy Kimmel, and many of us won't approach them directly, but we have them in our schools and our communities, we need to ask this honest question. Like, why don't we act as though we believe what we truly believe? And how is it that these people who are shameless will continually act out bold, demonstratively, and then here we are saying we love God, you know, we believe that these things are true, and we're putting our head down and being silent.
We're afraid to take it into the public square.
We need to realize evil doesn't sleep, and neither should righteousness, and we've got to talk, we've got to engage, we've got to be morally clear on what's going on. But the truth of the matter is Jimmy Kimmel, I mean, he's losing that network hundreds of millions of, I mean, not hundreds, probably tens of millions of dollars. I mean, the guy's not funny. He's obviously pandering to one. I mean, the first rule of comedy is you have to be able to make fun of everybody.
If they're clapping instead of laughing, you're not funny.
Yeah, it's just not funny. It's
Clapter,
just like, it's not funny. It's untoward, and it's also just, he's literally whistling his way to the graveyard of late night TV, like many of the other colleagues in the industry. And so I personally say him getting taken off the air can't happen soon enough. But he's doing everything he needs to do to make sure that happens sooner rather than later.
Yeah, that's right. It does bring up this one point that I was thinking about, though, as I read this story, which is that, like you said, evil never sleeps. And one of the things that I think happens when our side has control of the political power is we think that these dangers aren't ready to pop right back up. And the truth is, we haven't seen as much of the drag queen stories in the news under the Trump administration. And Lord willing, we won't continue to see them. But here's what happens if we give these people back the power that they had just like a year ago still.
Wow.
Donald Trump wasn't even in office. And a year ago, these people were in total control. They would have taken control of the entire government. We probably would have, given amnesty to the illegal immigrants, and we never would have had our country again. I really believe that that's where we were in the 24 election. But if we allow them to come back into political power and into cultural power, and they're allowed to continue with the grasp on these institutions, then these drag queen story hours, this sexual indoctrination, all of that's going to come right back with it. Like, it's not gone. It's like maybe laying low a little bit, but it's really still right there, and we can't allow it. That's why we have to do what you said. We have to go out and be bold in the culture.
Yeah, we have to push them back to the fringes where they belong. And the truth is, we live in a liberal constitutional republic. And liberal, I don't mean liberal by liberal left, but it's like, if people want to totally ruin their life, if they want to go off the deep end, I mean, there's some limits to that. It's like we kind of can put up with some of these behaviors, but they're never normative. They're never in the center. We never build on them. Government shouldn't encourage them. There's a great book, but I'm just full of books today. I'm just thinking about the books.
You've read so many books. It's one of the most impressive things about Pastor Stephen. For people that don't know, he reads like 2 books a week.
I'm constantly reading.
Never keep up.
I just finished a great book. It's actually a new book of his by Mark Levin. It's called On Power.
Yeah.
And Mark, in his book, he talks about positive and negative power. Here's the truth. The left, those people who hate God, those people who have determined in their hearts that they are God, they have no problem wielding power in a negative way to destroy, to tear down. On the flip side, you have people who love God, who know God, who are in elected office. We are always hesitant, mostly because we're being gaslighted by the wicked, to not wield power. But you got to understand, every one of us, I mean, our government is all about power.
Yeah.
I mean, it's all who has it and who doesn't. Power in and of itself isn't bad. How do you use power? That's everything. And I think right now we need to put the pedal to the metal, and we just need to drive back the darkness, because the truth is it's always pushing us. I think we have a unique opportunity in the Trump administration. I mean, we're going to look back, and history is going to be very, very kind to Donald Trump.
Yeah.
Kind to where we were. But we're not there yet. And the truth is that the evil never sleeps, and we've got to learn to wield power and to stop apologizing for it. They're going to call you mean names. They're going to try to misrepresent what you're doing. I mean, I got all kinds of, posts, well, look, ICE is, throwing innocent people, citizens into, and do you really think that happened one time? It wouldn't be all over the liberal media. It's not happening. The truth is they're covering their face because they keep getting doxxed.
Yeah.
The truth is, they're threatening their
and the leftists will go to their homes to try and murder them.
Oh yeah. So there's literally drug cartels, putting out bounties for dead ICE agents. I mean, it's absolute lawlessness. And the truth is, we just have to smile. We just have to smile, draw a line, and keep moving forward.
Yeah, which leads us to our last headline, where we brought up ICE and we brought up narco-terrorism. Which
I didn't even mean to. I didn't even know that was coming.
Which is our last headline I want to talk about today, which is the Trump administration has blown up a handful of drug smuggling boats. Most recently, a submarine in the Gulf of America, right? And so the Trump administration announced earlier this week that they had killed another drug smuggling vessel with 3 narco-terrorists aboard. No U.S. casualties, of course, because we're bombing them with drones from 1,000 meters in the air. There's they don't stand a chance, right? Pastor Stephen, is this what you voted for?
Listen, all I have to say is first of all, I had no idea that narco-terrorists had submarines. What happened with that? We need to pay attention. To which case, the next thing I would say is, Pastor Daniel, this is exactly what I voted for.
I think I couldn't have voted for this more. I don't think.
Yeah, and here's the thing about Trump. One of the things I do love about Donald Trump, he understands deterrence.
Yeah.
He understands peace through strength.
Yeah.
He understands that, listen, you hit us, we're going to hit you 10 times harder, so that after that, you might think twice before you hit again. We saw him do this with Iran, and it was absolutely great. Now, there's people who argue about whether or not we should have been involved in that and all that, but by the time Trump comes in, he just sits here and goes, you know what, we're going to send a message.
Yeah.
By the way, he sent a message not only with Iran backing Hamas, dealing with them, with Hezbollah, but he was incredibly wise. I mean, earlier that summer, he was in Qatar, I believe, and he went after the structures that were under the support of Hamas.
That's right.
And also, you know what? Trump is not particularly ideological. I mean, he doesn't want to get in there and nation build.
He's about what works.
He just wants, and he knows what works. Money talks in the Middle East.
Yeah.
And so he essentially said, I'm going to make a deal with them economically. And you know what? It so far has worked. It's definitely worked better than
anything
it ever
else
has in the past. And we got our 20 hostages back. And so as it goes to narco-terrorists and whether or not they deserve due process and all of this garbage, it's just go back to the Constitution.
Yeah.
The truth of the matter is he's on solid legal footing. You have no right to speedboat in drugs. Fentanyl kills.
We used to literally give letters of marque to random people to go fight pirates in the Atlantic Ocean.
It's crazy. To which case, I would just say, number one,
give me one.
You should pay attention to the submarines. I'm not really sure how narco-terrorists, a narco-terrorist, I'm not really sure how they get submarines. I'm not sure if there's an eBay for that. But maybe pay closer attention to that. But yes, I voted for this.
Yeah, I voted for this too. I joke with my wife. I was telling you when we were before we were filming that I'll joke with her sometimes when Trump does something, particularly on this front. I used to be a tank guy in the Army, and I'll tell Maddie, if they tell people that the tanks are going to Mexico to fight their cartels, I think I'm going. I'm re-enlisting. I'm
just telling you, I don't think I would join the National Guard. I'm not sure that I would do that. But if they had an ICE program that was kind of like the National Guard, you could go a weekend a month.
1 weekend a month.
And just help process or
whatever,
whatever, maybe shoot a little bit. I think I would probably do that.
Oh my God.
And here's what I'll say about this. All the joking aside, every time, one of these boats and these submarines get bombed, I mean, people lose their life.
Yeah.
But here's where you have to distinguish between the victim and the victimizer.
Yeah.
And here's the problem problem too long in our culture. And this is what happens when you're godless. You assume that people do evil because of some systematic issue, because of something that was done to them. And you don't realize, like what the Bible teaches, is we're actually sinful to heart. We have to make a choice to not sin. We have to make a choice to be good. We're naturally bad. I don't have to teach my kid I don't have to teach them, to disobey. They do that naturally.
Yeah.
Okay. I have to teach them to obey.
They do that all by themselves.
And I think when you look at it through that lens, it's like oftentimes people will say this with immigration. They'll be like, well, doesn't Jesus teach that, we should welcome the stranger? It does. But the Bible also cautioned Israel about letting the stranger take over their country, their culture, and their and nations, language, borders, and laws. Those are God's idea. Here's kind of how I say it as it deals with threats abroad, domestic and abroad. I don't lock my home at night because I hate the world outside. I lock my home at night because I love my family who's inside. And I think when we take a look at justice, when you take a look at what the Bible has to actually say instead of how we feel or some twisted media narrative about, well, did he make sure that they were the bad guys? I can tell you this with all eyes on the Trump administration, with the pressure that they're getting, with everyone in the establishment hating them, some of them working across the desk from each other that have been entrenched deep state bureaucrats. I assure you they are crossing T's and dotting I's, because if they aren't, you're going to hear about it in about a second through a leak or through some issue. And so the truth is, like, we elected Donald J. Trump to run the executive branch, to execute the laws of the land. And one of the reasons people hate him so much is because he's the first president in several presidents that have actually enforce the law.
Yeah.
That is his job. He is the chief enforcement officer of the United States government. And we have these laws that are on books, and we pretend that some aren't, some are worse than others. And that's true. But the truth of the matter is, like, we use this word like undocumented immigrant. I'm sorry, that's a criminal, illegal alien.
Yeah.
Well, they didn't commit any crimes after they got in. Yeah, but they committed a crime crossing the border without being invited.
Yeah.
I mean, do we do that with somebody? Our doors just open and somebody just walks in and we're having dinner with our family and they just walk through our door unannounced.
Welcome.
We don't know who they are. Do we have any obligation to host them and to bring them in? I mean, if they're bleeding and there's a situation, maybe. But this idea that's not what's happening here.
No, they're walking in with like cocaine in a drug boat.
Yeah.
And by the way, I will just say for our Texas voters here, this is one of the people that chiefly led, and I wasn't going to talk about this, but it's just when the Joe Biden administration was not enforcing these laws that were already on the books that Trump is now enforcing, there was a large coalition of people that were saying we needed to pass this big border package, right? And basically give the Democrats everything that they ever wanted. Our Senator John Cornyn was the one leading the fight to make that happen, to work with the Biden administration at the time. And you look at stuff like that and you're like, no, you can just enforce the laws that were already on the books. You can already do the thing. And I will say, Trump said this when he went on and announced it, which is that every single one of these boats that they blow up is approximately 25,000 American lives saved from overdose. Like, you don't have an obligation to let those people into your country. I'm sorry, but the stranger is not the narco-terrorist on a submarine. Like, that's not who the Bible's talking. It's just ridiculous.
Not. Yeah. No, it's not. And so, I think, I think this has been a fun 5 headlines.
Yeah, it's fun 5 headlines. Pastor Stephen, thank you so much. It's always good hanging out with you. Thank you, everyone, for joining us today. Until next time, I'm Daniel. I'm joined with our host, Pastor Stephen Martin. We'll see you next time. Thank you for joining us today on the Under God podcast. If this episode encouraged you, share it with a friend or family member. Your support helps us reach more people with God's Word. Be sure to subscribe on YouTube, Rumble, Spotify, Apple Podcasts, and at undergodpodcast.com so that you never miss an episode. Follow us on Instagram, Facebook, X, True Social, and TikTok for more content, behind-the-scenes moments, and faith-filled encouragement throughout the week. We want to hear from you. Leave a comment, join the conversation, and send us your questions. We will be answering them in upcoming Q&A episodes. Until next time, remember to think biblically about the things that matter most.